We welcome everybody at home or wherever you are. I'd like us to begin with a brief meditation. I led a memorial service yesterday at which the family chose this poem by Mary Oliver. She is every preacher's favorite poet. I'll read it slowly, and you can let it serve to draw us together spiritually in this moment. The Swan. Did you too see it drifting all night on the Black River? Did you see it in the morning rising into the silvery air? An armful of white blossoms, a perfect commotion of silk and linen as it leaned into the bondage of its wings, a snowbank, a bank of lilies, biting the air with its black beak. Did you hear it fluting and whistling, a shrill, dark music, like the rain pelting the trees, like a waterfall, knifing down the black ledges? And did you see it, finally, just under the clouds, a white cross streaming across the sky, its feet like black leaves, its wings like the stretching light of the river? And did you feel it in your heart, how it pertained to everything? And have you too finally figured out what beauty is for? And have you changed your life? Lorraine joins us from Theater Y today, and she is here to present part 3 in our 3-part series on trauma, what it is and how we can better understand it and even address it in our lives and in the lives of others. Melissa Lorraine is an actor and director who co-founded Theater Y and has been its artistic director for the last 16 years. In 2018, she began to research movement therapy for trauma rehabilitation and works with both harmed and responsible parties across the city of Chicago. Providing this therapy at Cook County Jail and Stateville Correctional Center has become her most meaningful labor. I learned about Melissa from Nancy Meislan, who's on the call today. Nancy directed me to the Reset program that you were on WBEZ Radio, you and your colleague. And Nancy said, this is somebody who should come to Winnetka Congregational Church for spiritual enrichment. Thank you, Nancy, for referring us to Melissa and her colleague. And that got me thinking maybe we could do more than 1 week on trauma. There might be enough there for at least 2 or 3 weeks. If you are at home, please mute yourselves. That will help us have a smoother meeting. And over to you, Melissa.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Thank you for having me. And that does serve as a very good introduction of who I am and how I came here. But I think it's important to confess my credentials. They say all research is me search, and that's a phrase. And so I don't come into this work with any degrees in psychology, or I have a degree in acting, which is its own specialty, but doesn't carry quite enough to get me into spaces like this. But in 2017, I got into a car that I mistook as my Uber, and I was not let out for 4 hours. And it was immediately following the Camino de Santiago. For those of you that I just mentioned, we walked the pilgrimage across Spain. I had this notion that there were no strangers in the world, only people I hadn't met yet. I mean, I was kind of very trusting at that moment in my life, and it really cost me dearly. And I came out of it with PTSD, pretty severe PTSD, and a sense that I didn't know anything about the world. I had never imagined anyone to be capable of those things. And so suddenly I had to suppose that everyone might be capable of those things. It was kind of an extreme reversal of psychology. And I was in my own theater and couldn't imagine performing in that physical state, couldn't imagine playing again, couldn't imagine going into an imagined reality, because my own reality was so vivid, it was kind of all-consuming. I couldn't pretend something else. And so I dissociated from my body pretty severely, and ended up invited to Serbia to work with some colleagues of mine, some dancer choreographer colleagues that had long experience with me and with my person. And they offered to kind of invent a physical boot camp for me. They said, surely we have enough tools in our respective arsenals that we can come up with a way to bring you back into your body. So I spent a month with them, and it was a process of trial and error. We would try exercises that we had done together many times, thinking it would be a safe, familiar exercise, and it would be horrifying. And then we would try other things and discover that there was a thread to follow there, and that there was something of life on the other end of it. And so I have built this practice entirely from what has worked for me. And I will go into more specifically what the practice is. But when I returned from Serbia with this extraordinary, I had two individuals pouring their life's work and imagination into my specific issues for a month. And I felt so inexplicably blessed. I didn't know how. I felt like no victim in the world had ever received such care. I just felt really cared for. And that was a burden that I felt I needed to pass forward. And so the obvious first choice was to work with other women. And then it became clear to me that that was a misunderstanding of harm, that the responsible parties are also functioning and operating out of trauma, and that maybe I needed to go closer to the source, if you will, the individuals who have long dissociated from their body in order to perpetuate harm. And so I ended up in the prisons of Chicago, and part of that was also for me, because I was also trying to root out this new fear I had in men. I wanted to go closer to the fear and to try to purge it out of myself. And it was in those spaces, in the prisons, that this work really came to full fruition. I felt truly healed by my interaction with these men. They proved everything that I was hypothesizing about deserving this care. If they hadn't been traumatized prior to prison, they certainly were being traumatized in prison. And so it kind of brought the whole work full circle. And I'm really interested in continuing to investigate how we can spread this out across every human being, and not divide ourselves up into victim and perpetrator, which those words actually are very problematic to begin with. But the best words I've replaced them with is harmed and responsible parties. But even that, it's more complicated than that. Responsibility is more complicated than that. So So I want to just zoom out for a moment and give you a little bit of background on what I have researched as the foundation for the exercises that came to work. So I'll give you some background on trauma, and then hopefully you'll be better equipped to understand why certain exercises might work and why certain exercises might not. So I left out his first name, but his full name is Bessel van der Kolk. Bessel van der Kolk.
So the last two presenters have
Mentioned him at length.
yes, not at length, but I mean, there's a common thread here.
He is
Go ahead.
definitely the expert in this field, for sure. Van der Kolk, head of Boston's Trauma Center at the Justice Resource Institute, likens crime to the body becoming a container of dread and horror. The individual is then offered, at best, some version of talk therapy, which is undoubtedly helpful psychologically, but which fails to address their harmed substance. The trauma has been sustained by their body. I don't know how to pronounce this name, but you can all see it. A psychologist who studied social behavior and education at UC Irvine and later became a rape survivor says most people don't process trauma cognitively. Google rape symptoms and you'll find people experience GI distress, insomnia, depression, anxiety, and flashbacks. She said, trauma symptoms are registered in the body as sensations. The trauma isn't even stored in the parts of the brain where language can access it. Mm-hmm. A sympathetic and listening ear is inarguably valuable. Van der Kolk says, feeling somebody understands your suffering is enormously comforting, but it doesn't make your body know that you are safe. The real method is resetting your physiology. Trauma is about your body or organism having been reset to interpret the world as a terrifying place and yourself in danger in it. The sense of goodness and safety disappears out of the victim's body. If people need to overcome the trauma, we need to also find methods to bypass what they call the tyranny of language. The trauma is not about being reasonable or verbal or articulate. Traumatized people cut off their relationship to their bodies. They may not feel what's happening in their bodies. They may not register what goes on with them. And so what became very clear is that we needed to help people feel safe feeling the sensations in their body, to start having a relationship with the life of their organism. Safety has to be a bodily perception, not just a cognitive perception. That is the foundation. But you need to actually feel that feeling. You need to know what is happening in your body. You need to know where your toe is and where your pinky is. Your body, you need to be aware of what it's doing. Trauma is certainly a tragedy, but it is also an opportunity for us to learn about ourselves and our interdependence as a species. Van der Kolk has stated that PTSD has opened the door to scientific investigation of the nature of human suffering. This field has opened up two areas. One is the area of trauma and survival and suffering, but people are also studying the nature of human connections and the connection between us, also from a scientific point of view. What really happens when two people see each other, when two people respond to each other, when people mirror each other, when two bodies move together in dancing and smiling and talking. The theater, its tools and practices are clearly a means of reintroducing the isolated individual to the other, but it is also a way of reintroducing the now alien body to the self. Theater Y is developing a physical practice drawing from all the tools and methods of the theater worldwide to, quote, cleanse the body of trauma. The axis of the work, flanked by things like yoga and meditation, is the work of Tadashi Suzuki and Shogo Ota, who developed a physical practice after the bomb in Japan. The work contains exercises that are physically demanding, imaginatively expanding, or time distending. It is something akin to entering the immense silence that follows an explosion, and the individual is reintroduced to the mechanism of their body in such a basic way that they re-enter the self little by little. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe the idea of like in a movie, when there's an explosion and they try to mimic what happens inside the brain and everything goes slow and quiet. and the person is trying to assess what's left and if they have all their limbs, and it's that kind of work. We are striving through these theatrical practices to offer the opportunity to discharge the trauma that's held in the body, working with the body's wisdom. If the body can become a pleasure to inhabit again, and the individual can extend his or herself within a community, the trauma has lost two of its most damaging weapons: pleasure and community. It is known there is no friendship like that of battle. It is also known that common trauma forges a bond. Can common healing also forge a bond? Can this bond through healing extend to include the very source of a person's trauma, the responsible party? Can we know and understand one another in ways that we choose to engage with our own recovery, growth, or redefining of self? What makes us refuse our own wellness? It is known that individuals who experience trauma in childhood or adolescence are at a much higher risk of experiencing it again later in life. The individual who is defined at an early age by trauma subconsciously seeks out further confirmation of their identity. It's really important. If you feel that you deserve the trauma, you will unconsciously keep looking for confirmation of that. If this knowledge resides somewhere in the body, can we rewrite a human's identity in their substance? Can we shift the focus of the individual off the fearful unknown, the other, the now alien body, unendurable time, addiction, uncontrollable impulses, to a known common enemy, fear, that we must fight off together in community with all our being and our collective wisdom and every practice at our fingertips? This idea of rewriting their identity in their substance, I think one of the things that became really clear to me was that something that I needed, because I had experienced harm at the hands of another, one of the things that you are struggling against is that was true, that happened, that is real, and it's possible in the world. And that reality or that knowledge becomes all-consuming. So then you assume at every turn that that's what's awaiting you. So you're not trying to forget that because it's true. And you're not trying to tell yourself a nice story to cover up the possibility of harm, but you are trying to recomplicate your own narrative and remember that you can also be healed at the hands of another, that there's both. A lot of people who've been traumatized try to withdraw from all humans. Humans now all seem dangerous, and that actually withholds from them the potential of healing as well at the hands of another. And we have to remember that both are possible, that someone might harm you, but that someone might heal you. And that's part of the negotiation of your work, is just allowing yourself to remember the spectrum of possibility in the world and not just the possibility of harm. So it's important that you make yourself available to human beings again for the repairing process. And that's really frightening. Mm-hmm. So going back into the work that we found, the first thing that they proposed to me as a daily exercise was a walk at dawn in silence with a friend. And all of those parts were important. The waking up before the sun rose, not going immediately into language, having a companion, and moving through space. And I will admit that when I started to do this in the morning, I was going for these walks a little bit like an adolescent having a tantrum. I did not know why this was going to help me. I saw nothing, meaning that nothing was beautiful to me. To tell you how extreme it was, there was a section of ground in Serbia that was covered by neon green moss, and I couldn't see it. I didn't notice it. At some point, my friend asked me if I had seen the moss, and I said, "What moss?" And I'd never, I mean, once she brought my attention to it, I had never seen neon green moss in my life. It was remarkable, but I had no eyes for it. I was just, sleepwalking through space. And so it really was this kind of very simple reawakening process. Even the act of your feet hitting the ground over and over is kind of beating you back into presence, back into I'm here, but I'm here. And it has to be this simple to start with. So that eventually became kind of an extraordinary exercise. She would move because she was healthy, and I guess this is important to say. She was very vibrant and alive, and so she was walking through her own forests, almost dancing with the trees, almost reacting to the things she was seeing, And in contrast to my zombie, it became kind of a carrot, Wow, must be nice to see the world that way and to respond so fully and to be so embodied, And so it was important to have this friend who was well, in contrast to the way that I was moving through space, to start to have an appetite to feel more like her. And by the end of our walks, I was moving through space, I felt, in a way that I didn't even move through space as a child. And this is the opportunity of trauma, is that you really are given a chance to discover things you never would have even been curious about, and arrive in a fuller embodiment than you even had as a child. Mm-hmm. So just to give you that hope, there really is deep joy on the other side of this. And then I came to be really grateful for the whole experience, just to mine further what it meant to be a person. So that was the first exercise. Then to give you an exercise that did not work, or was actually re-traumatizing. Mm-hmm. They practice something called manipulation. And I had done it with them at length for 8 years, and found it to be one of the most pleasurable experiences ever prior to my incident. And so we thought, okay, let's go to our go-to, which is manipulation. Let's do the thing that's always been wonderful. And to describe it, the person who is being worked on is laying on the ground, and their only charge is to fully release every muscle in their body. That's their only job, is to just completely surrender to gravity. And the people around them are manipulating their body, trying to find where they're still holding tension. If they lift your arm and you're not fully giving it to them, they shake it and they try to figure out where it is in your shoulder that you've got tension. And it feels wonderful for the normal person, not so wonderful for the traumatized body. Mm-hmm. It's a loss of agency, which is all too familiar. Mm-hmm. It's not the plan. And so we kind of, in the process of revisiting it, it really did sort of careen me into memories, flashbacks, very even things that I hadn't remembered until we were in the midst of the exercise, and we pulled all the alarms and said, yeah, that's not it. So then we went to an exercise called slow tempo, and this is what was developed in Japan after the bombs were dropped. If you can imagine, Japan experienced kind of a national PTSD on the scale of 9/11 times 100, where anything is possible. And there's no sense of when it will even end because of all the consequences that continue to follow. And so all the Japanese as a population were, you can imagine, in this kind of post-traumatic state of complete disillusionment and what I described earlier about the moment in the movie when there's an explosion and everything goes quiet and slow in the movie and the person's trying to reassess if they have their limbs. That was, Japan as a whole, the silence, the stillness. Do I still have my limbs? What now? What next? What do I hope for? Where am I going? What do I have left? And so they decided to pull back into what they called slow tempo, or certain artists. It wasn't a generic, but artists decided to say, okay, let's take it slower. In regular speed, I don't have a perceptible will. And this is important to understand too, that when you've lost agency, so just to tell you what, for example, when I first arrived in Serbia, my friend asked me if I wanted tea or coffee. And the question was unimaginable to me. I couldn't imagine why anyone would prefer one over the other. I had lost preference. I had lost a will. and I didn't know why exactly. I mean, it really felt like I had no pulse, or I had lost my own vitality. But part of that is that you've lost agency. And so somewhere subconsciously, it feels safer to have no preference. If I don't have ultimate control anyway, it hurts less if I didn't want something or another. You just kind of go flatline in a way to compensate for the fear of what's next. So in order to experience any sort of pulse, you almost have to slow down. So this slow tempo is quite literally moving as slowly as you're able to move. That, if this is stillness, what is the movement speed just above stillness? And so it is this extreme discipline of muscle control. But inside of that, for example, if I were to hear a bird and look at the bird, I have not perceived several steps. What lived in the microseconds was hearing the bird, my brain realizing that it's a bird, making the decision to look at the bird, and then looking at the bird. And in real time, you miss half of those impulses. So if you pull it way back, you can start to perceive the sort of barely notable instincts, like, oh, I would like to raise my arm, and for me, that was like, oh, I do want something, and it was just a little sign of life. And proof that I was still in there, and that I did have a preference. What also happens when you're moving in slow tempo is that when you're trying to avoid your own trauma, you are breathing very shallow all the time, because your emotions live down here and they're very dangerous. And if you breathe too deeply, you'll tap into them and they might hijack you, meaning there's no telling what will happen if I really tap into what I'm feeling. I could lose my mind, or you don't know what. But that's part of the problem, is that the official psychology term is befriending your feelings. You need to re-befriend your feelings, because they become, just like your body becomes something you don't want to be in dialogue with, your feelings are something and you're better off not tapping into. So when you breathe, when you go into slow tempo, you have to breathe because it requires every muscle in your body. And then all of your feelings start flooding up, because that's where they live. So here you are, you're in slow tempo, you've breathed into your belly, your feelings start to flood, but you're held in this womb of the actual exercise. The slowness keeps you from the panic that might ensue if you were to feel your feelings. And so what you discover is that you are able to purge in safety. So yes, you're weeping, but you're calm. And that is the gift also of the slow tempo, is this kind of container inside of which to go ahead. It's okay. They're not going to hijack you. You're not going to lose your mind. You're not going to, who knows what, because you're held in this molasses kind of glacier speed that is okay. It's okay, and so you end up practicing this almost on a daily basis as a daily shower. Like, okay, what else haven't I worked out or let out? And the last benefit of slow tempo, which is part of why I thought to bring it into the prisons, is that you have arrived at a very antagonistic relationship with time. It's either going too slow or it's going too fast. For me, at least, time was this punishment that I was subjected to in a very disruptive way. Either way, it was either something I had to suffer and endure interminably, or it was flying by and I couldn't get what I needed from it. And so part of slow tempo, you'll discover if you try it, is that it demonstrates that you have real authority over your experience of time. You wouldn't know it, but you do. If you drop into this glacier speed, time flies. The actual clock flies, which is kind of a superpower and gives you this sense of omnipotence and agency again. I even have control over my experience of time, it's kind of a delight. And then I thought, oh, wow, I would really like to offer that superpower to people serving time. The notion that you are in here for a very concrete amount of time. Can I give them dominion over that experience? Can I give them some sense of agency, even over time itself? So that is slow tempo. And then the last exercise, and we can try any of these or not, but the last exercise that became really central to the work is something called authentic movement. And I didn't know this when I started trying it out on myself, but this was used with Holocaust survivors after World War II. So it's like I stumbled into these and then discovered I wasn't the first to figure out that this helps. But it was affirming to realize, yes, okay, this is a universal, or others agree that this is useful. So authentic movement is something that's done in partners. You have an individual who closes their eyes and is doing the movement, and you have a partner who is looking out for you, making sure that you don't hurt yourself on anything in your environment, but also jotting down what they see. So the person with their eyes closed is asking themselves one simple question, which is, what feels better? So if they were me and they were asking what feels better, they might decide that there's a little tension, that actually crossing their legs is not so great, or that holding their head up feels particularly problematic right then. And you just, that's the only voice you're listening to. Again, not an easy coach for the traumatized individual, the body, meaning they're trying very hard not to listen to anything the body is saying because it's harboring a lot of things, a lot of junk, let's say. And so when you start to do this work, the first go around might look a little bit like a tantrum, or like you're exercising something, because you do feel like like a person who's feeling really good would have a thought of what feels better, and it might be, it might be something really nice. But if you imagine a child who is being abused, the instinct of their body might be rage, might be to flail or to hit, or what. If you really ask it what it wants, the first thing it wants is something aggressive or something ugly or something that matches it's movement that matches the feeling inside. So it's not a pretty movement that comes out. And so the person outside is just jotting down what they see. I saw seaweed in the ocean, or I saw a scarecrow, or I saw a hippopotamus in the mud. Whatever images your movements are calling to their mind, they'll write down for you, just as a reflection of what your body had to say today. Because you, in the investigation of what feels better, have no outside eye. It's not performative at all. You're not trying to perform for someone or give them something pretty. So you may have no memory even of what your body did. So it's important that you have the outside individual reflecting back to you. Today, I really saw these images out of your body. And over time, you start, again, similarly to the walk in the morning at dawn, you start to develop an appetite for something else. So for me personally, my experience in the authentic movement was that gravity was profound. I was really heavy. Everything felt heavy, and I wanted to be close to the ground. But after days and days of this movement that is so heavy, you get tired of that sensation, and you want something else for yourself. You want to be lighter. You want to feel something different in your body. And so you end up kind of coaching yourself into another body, because it's exhausting to be so heavy. But then you also start to trust, this idea of listening and obeying your body, and you re-engage a relationship with this thing that is your whole real estate, and you enjoy obeying it, and it enjoys being obeyed. I should say that too, that in terms of like a child that you ignore all the time, your body is just dying for you to pay a shred of attention to it. It's like it's willing to get lugged around where you take it, and treat it however you treat it, and ignore it however you want to ignore it. But when you start to actually listen to it, it's thrilled. And so that also feeds itself. Like, wow, it feels a lot better to actually listen to this miracle of mine, and give it what it's asking for. And now you're back in dialogue with one another, and dissociation is in the past. And so these are the tenets of the work. I don't know if you need an example at all. Like I'll just say that the slow tempo is usually walking. So just to give you just a sense of what it looks like to do this for 30 minutes or however long you wish. The trick is to get every part of your body in adherence to the new tempo. And the hardest muscle you will have to control are your eyes. They're going to want to blink in real time, because you've never been asked to do anything else. You've never asked your eyes to do anything but blink as they wish. So the hardest thing is the sort of slow opening and closing, but your body is trying to move through space as slow as it knows how. And I didn't drop into breath before I started, and so it's really challenging to get your muscles to cooperate with this. And I shouldn't be talking. But 30 minutes worth of this is really remarkable. I dare you to try it, or even just now, as we're talking, try opening your hand as slowly as you can. And I mean as slowly as you can. So if you can go slower, go slower. And what you'll discover in your hand are it creaks. It has, you've never even explored your body at this speed to know that it creaks. So it's helpful, I think, to discover the space between, the things you've never even, the sensations you've never experienced because you've never gone that slow, The practice I find useful because when I meditate, I fall asleep. I have a very hard time closing my mind down in that way and not immediately falling asleep. So I use this as a sort of moving meditation practice that keeps me engaged, awake, physical, and I've also found it to be really helpful in spaces like the prisons where you don't have any resources and you don't have any space, but you have, this doesn't require much space. It requires no resources. It's really a very personal, quiet, small practice. The thing that did strike me, and I just want to mention this, the walk at dawn in silence with a friend is something that none of them can try. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that really landed in terms of how vicious our correctional systems are, that something that basic is not available to them at all. This healing work presents us with opportunities for profound communion. We perceive ourselves as individual organisms, independent of the social environment, but we are in fact in total interdependence. Social context is everything in regards to damage or resilience in the face of trauma. No one can deny that we all have dark and light sides, and that we are all in the same boat, and that you am I in a fundamental way, and that your humanity and my humanity is the same humanity, and that I cannot be a human being without you. There's a South African noun, Ubuntu. I am because of who we all are. It defends above all the human virtues of compassion and humanity for all our sakes. It flies in the face of individualist values that would have you believe that you can find fullness of self without carrying your community into that fullness as well. I am because you are, and I can only be alive to the degree that you're alive. When you are traumatized, you think that you are in the world all by yourself. Feeling safe interiorly and being connected with other people at the same time is the essence of treatment and healing and going on with your life, but also knowing that you're also part of a very large whole.
Melissa, could you share any particular success stories that you've had people with incarcerated people, either short-term or long-term?
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine that it is very difficult for a room full of men to engage in this work in front of each other. And so I have actually had them make pacts, what happens in this room stays in this room, right? It's really interesting how critical it is for their safety and their survival that others don't find out that they even tried this stuff. I mean, it's really such a toxic environment. And so one of them said outright, it's not in my best interest to be this vulnerable. And that really landed, you know, also just the horror of the fact that we are putting them in an environment where they are suiting up. They are not stripping down and coming to understand who they are and why they did what they did. They are only getting more and more armor every day in order to survive. And that's terrifying, because then, you know, if they were to come out, which I'm actively working on a bill to get parole reinstated in Illinois. For those of you that don't know, there's not been parole in Illinois since 1978. So
Really?
yes.
And what about conjugal visits?
That I don't know. I don't know
Because
about
that's very, or even visitation at all.
yeah. Yeah. So if they were to get out, what we've done during their time inside is actually make them harder, not softer, which seems ridiculous, you know. So I said to them that I really understand that they need to have their armor on in certain moments of their day. But if they do not remember how to remove it, it's wearing them, they're not wearing it. You know, they have to reclaim authority over this armor. And I'm here to help them remember where the latches are and how it comes off. And, you know, because that is just critical to their humanity. So they are certainly nervous. They have a lot to protect themselves from in terms of this work. But I had a student that had been in solitary confinement for 7 years. Mm-hmm. And he, in my classroom, was trying to do authentic movement. You know, he was just obeying his body. And then he happened to stumble into a shaft of sunlight. And I watched him melt. I mean, it was kind of devastating and heartbreaking to see the impact of sunlight on this person's body. I had a man who was trying to do authentic movement, and afterwards we were all sharing, and we all noticed, those of us that were observing that day saw him in the middle of the room kind of beaming and doing this little dance. And we talked afterwards, and he said, I forgot. I had this little dance when I was 4 that always felt better than stillness. You know, when waiting for the bus or waiting in line at the grocery store, he had this little dance that was his, but he'd long forgotten it until he asked his body what felt better, and out came this little dance. You know, so it does work, and I mean, those 2 stories are just an example of the way that your body knows, you know, your body knows everything. You just aren't listening. You just aren't listening anymore. And we've kind of civilized ourselves out of our very deep physical wisdom, even the wisdom of centuries, you know, the way that we've evolved as human beings, and what our bodies know from what our minds would never be able to articulate. For example, one thing that I find really interesting is the universal rocking phenomenon. An orphan will rock themselves, or the way that it appears in Judaism. That motion is a universal self-soothing. It's very interesting, but it's not cerebral. Nobody, you know, like, try to explain how the child came to do that for themselves. It came out of their body's knowledge, their body's wisdom, or autism, and the way that it responds to movement, trampolines or bicycles. You know, there's a whole host of knowledge we have yet to tap into about what our bodies need and want, that we're over intellectualizing. We try to think through it and we actually stifle it because it's not that complicated and it's something you already know. You just aren't listening.
Please.
The slow movement, it was when you said that, you can feel your body creaking. And it was funny because I felt that and I thought maybe it was just in my mind or something like that, but I could almost hear it.
Uh-huh.
And it was weird, and I was almost like in a trance almost.
Right?
And it's hard for me to meditate on things, but for some reason I kind of drifted,
Yeah.
So it's really weird. It's just kind of
Oh, I'm
out
so
of body
glad.
experience
Right?
almost.
It's strange and it's hard to believe. That's why it sounds a little whatever until you try it, and then it's really as simple as it sounds and as sort of effective.
Mhm.
It's funny you said an out-of-body experience is actually
In
an
your
in-body
body
experience.
Yeah.
That brings us to a
Yeah.
kind of
But it was
awareness.
weird, though. It was like,
Well, I just wanted to illustrate another in-body. I was walking on the ice I remember a heavy cold and dark. And I slid on the ice and I don't know which way I rolled, but either rolled this way, lots rolls, or head over heels. And I had to figure out, was I injured? And I wasn't. And I later learned that the inner body does this to protect itself, but I didn't know that word inner body. Somebody fell off a ski lift and high up and lived, but they rolled. When they hit the ground, they went. Now I didn't know that. I've never heard of that, but I did that.
Wow. See? Exactly.
Is that it?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a perfect example of your body knowing exactly what to
How to
how to navigate.
This reaction that I had to throw myself off a runaway horse. And I got my feet out of the stirrups and I rolled.
Wow.
Yeah, I rolled. I sat up and I had a messy forehead and for years I had a spine problem that never,
Yeah.
but rolling saved me.
Wow.
This has been a really fitting, conceptually and practically, a very fitting conclusion to our 3-week series. You're really very articulate about this, about something, you're articulate about something that is embodied. So it was a nice combination of your ability to explain it and also do it with us. I want to wish you, on behalf of everybody, I want to say thank you for your work in our prisons and jails. There's no more important work in society probably than what you're doing. So thank you on behalf of everybody here. And there's probably nobody better than you to do it because you are obviously, you are committed completely to it. Thank you, Melissa.
Bringing the theater to Lawndale too.
Yeah, right.
So.
So last thing I'll say is,
living.
last I looked on the WBEZ archives, you can find the longer interview with you and your colleague. What's her name?
Nadia Pillay.
Nadia Pillay. And I did a simple search on the WBEZ website for Theater Y, or you could even search for Melissa Lorraine. But you can find it. The program was Reset. You might be able to go to Reset Archives and find it. But there's a whole hour interview